Yeah, welcome back to this edition of Yoruba History Channel. I thank our guests, Professor Akintoye and Professor Adiboye, for spending their time to come and continue the discussion. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce this book, A History of the Yoruba People, written by Professor Banji Akintoye. It's a very comprehensive rendition of Yoruba history from the earliest times to the present, and it actually deals with some of the issues we are discussing and we'll be discussing as time goes on the Yoruba History Channel. And it's a very nice, comprehensive book which is being sold all over the world and which Odua Pathfinder is making arrangements to get at a discount. So, you want to grab a copy, let us know at Odua Pathfinder, and we'll make the announcements on the discount available. It's once again A History of the Yoruba People by Banji Akintoye, and he's right here sitting beside me, and you will hear words of wisdom from the two men. Thank you and welcome, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Now, the main issue I want us to discuss today is on the Yoruba urban civilization. It is said by scholars worldwide that the Yoruba were the most urbanized people in Black Africa. That is, that the Yoruba were the nation that built and lived in towns more than any other Black African people. I believe our viewers would like to be enlightened on that what is this about Yoruba urban civilization?
Okay, urban civilization simply means people developed towns, lived in towns, and the towns helped the development of their civilization. And no other Black African people developed towns as much as the Yoruba did. From as early as the 10th, 11th, 12th century, the Yoruba have been building towns and living in towns. By the time the first Europeans came to the coast of West Africa in the 15th century, there were already many large towns in the interior of Yoruba land. They saw some of the towns on the coast, but they also heard of the many towns in the interior. For instance, one Portuguese trader on the coast of in Lagos wrote about Ijebu Ode as early as the beginning of the 16th century. So we have always had towns. By the time he was writing about Ijebu Ode, there were probably hundreds of towns all over Yoruba land. And then the first Europeans to go into the interior of Yoruba land from the coast did so in 1825-6. Their record is available to everybody to read. That's Captain Clapperton and his team. Their testimony is that every few miles, all over Yoruba land, they came to a town that is large, well populated, and clean. Studded, they said, with clean habitations. They said the roads to some of the towns are through an avenue of noble trees, and so on and so forth. That is what we are referring to when we are talking of Yoruba urban civilization. And then the urban civilization, living in towns, did a lot of things for Yoruba civilization. It created a sophisticated political system, a sense of freedom, a willingness to accept people from other places, and so on. You know, when people live in small community, in no towns, in the bush, they tend to be hostile to foreigners. But when you live in a town, a large town, you tend to be open. Marketplaces develop there. In fact, some of the things that develop in Europe, you're talking about hotels and motels and restaurants. Yoruba towns only had roadside food sellers and buka, where the traveler through the town can go in and buy food. Living in town broke down the rigidity of separation between lineage and lineage. We all live in the same town, so we are all members of the same community, and so on. That's why the Yoruba are today more cosmopolitan in their attitudes, more willing to accept people from other places, more in political life, more open, more inclined to democratic tendencies, more willing to give their women freedom, and so on. All of those things are the gift of our urbanism. Being an urban people just lifted the Yoruba people culturally, in terms of civilization, above a lot of their neighbors. That's it.
Okay. Any contribution?
Nothing much other than to just put in the sentence that the practice of communalism is almost goes in parallel with urbanization. The Yoruba attitude to politics as you see it today essentially says that whereas every individual is so an individual, a Yoruba thinks he is because we are.
Yeah, community.
The community has been so important in Yoruba land, and it couldn't have happened if we were isolated little villages where every family was named to itself. So when we are analyzing what is happening to Yoruba in Nigeria and what is happening to Africans and what have you, we cannot dodge the effect of urbanization on Yoruba. And sometimes we complain about what looks like a negative thing in Yoruba when in fact it is positive. Our determination to go communalistic and to watch out for one another over and above individual interest is what brought us to where we are. I agree that is now being corrupted, but we are going to have to seek a balance between the heritage that we got from urbanization and its corollaries and the imperatives of today's Nigerian politics.
Okay. Well, you mentioned something about the imperatives of Nigeria's today's politics. Mm-hmm. How has living in towns helped the modern development in Yoruba land? How has that helped?
It has helped Yoruba people a lot. It has helped Yoruba people a lot. January 17, 1955, universal free primary education was declared all over Western region. And the Yoruba were not the only people organized. Their cousins, the Edo, and the Shekiris and what have you, in what was then called Western Nigeria, all the way up to Boji Agbo, to even Asaba. There is a culture of urbanization. So when Awolowo decided, and his people decided that they were going to have free education, it was cheap, because they could build a school in every urban center and it will fill up rapidly. The Yoruba families went about a mile or two or three to their farms during the day and came right back to the city or town in the evening. So they had security, they had what we can call economy of scale. So it was easy for Awo and his colleagues to put a school everywhere where one was needed. They didn't have to build infinitely many of them. Now take that and take it to another community, where they have isolated villages all over the whole place. No government will have the resource to build a school for 4 people in a village and 10 people in a village and all of that stuff. And so the survival and continuance of free education in Western Nigeria was a consequence of urbanization. The failure of free education in Eastern Nigeria, which was started in 1957, 2 years after Awo, its failure was not because Aziki was less smart or they had less resource. It was because the spread of the population in Eastern Nigeria did not support that kind of practice.
Yes, even from the beginning, when the Christian missionaries came at the middle of the 19th century and started to build churches and schools, the urban population, the urban civilization of Yoruba land made it easy. So they were just going, establishing churches and schools in towns all over Yoruba land. They couldn't do so in many other parts of Africa or many other parts of Nigeria because there were no such towns. The result is that education then went very fast in Yoruba land. Christian missions were all over the place. By the first schools were built in late in the 1840s. By the 1860s, there were Yoruba families sending their children away to England or whatever to go and learn more from the Christian mission elementary schools. So that by 1870, Yorubas were already producing university graduates, lawyers, doctors, engineers, surveyors, etc., and so on. No other Nigerian people produced a university graduate until 1934. That's almost 70 years later. So it's the urban facility makes Yoruba land jump ahead. That's the power of urbanization. The fact that the others were not as urbanized as the Yoruba created a drag which the Yoruba did not have to suffer.
Okay, well, that's cool. Why do you think, or why did the Yorubas develop in that way? That's urban. Why did they develop in that manner?
It's
what is responsible for it?
Yeah, the first town we built was at Ife, and that was in the 10th century. Before then, we had lived in small communities too, like most other people in Black Africa. But sometime in the 10th century, the people in the bush, in the forests of Ife, the small communities scattered about 20-something of them, they began to fight one another. And the fighting went on and on and on and on until, somehow something happened in their mentality, and they said, listen, we can't continue to fight like this. Let's bring this fighting to an end. But let's come together as one town, as one settlement. And that's how Ife arose. After Ife, the example of Ife then created a momentum. And Yoruba people began to go in the bush to go and find more towns like that. So wherever they found a group of small settlements, they would say, let us come together. In some cases, the people in those settlements would accept the newcomers and start a town. In some cases, they would say, no, this is our land, and fight. And then there will be fighting. But in the end, there will be a town. So that's how towns were established all over Yoruba land in a space of 300 years, in a space of 400 years. By the 16th century, most of Yoruba land was covered by towns, each ruled by a king called Oba.
Okay.
And they also developed the practice of building walls around their town.
Okay.
The wall became a proud thing. When you are proud that you live in a town which has a big wall. And the wall, is cheap, or well, not cheap in terms of human labor. You dig a big trench around the town, and you heap the earth from the trench on the inside, so that if an enemy is coming, we have to go down into the trench and then try to climb up before reaching your town. So that's the Yoruba type of wall. You will see it in Benin, you see it in Owo. Just some towns in Yoruba land had very proud walls. There was a time Ila people built one of the greatest walls in Yoruba land, and people began to call them Ila Yara. Yara. The name of the wall is Yara.
Okay.
That is Ila of the Great Wall. Okay. And one Olowo Oshoboye in the 18th century decided to build a great wall for war. And he mobilized his people, and they built a great wall for war too. So people used to travel from other parts of Yoruba land to go and see the walls. Yeah, so that is it. So building walls around our town became a matter of pride. Yeah.
Okay. All right. On the question of pride, this is just an aside, and I want either of you to address it. The pride, the historical pride, does not appear to be ingrained in Yoruba people. In other words, with such a rich history, it appears as if there is no sense of arrogance on the part of Yoruba people vis-a-vis other people?
Yorubas are proud.
What is the
There's a difference between pride and arrogance.
Yeah. So
Yoruba people are very proud of their history. They are very proud of their culture, but they are so sophisticated that they don't become arrogant towards other people. In fact, the Yoruba man is ready to accept other people so easily. We say alejo lanjo fun. That's the only Yoruba.
What does that mean?
Alejo. It is the stranger among us for whom we bend. We bend for the stranger in our midst. We provide first for the stranger in our midst. That's the Yoruba. That's a common. Yes, we bend for the stranger among us. We say we are the ones who hide bits of food in the eaves of our houses, so that the unexpected stranger may not suffer. You know, and our kings provided for accommodation in their palaces. Every Yoruba king, every Yoruba palace had a quarter near the marketplace, near the king's market, where strangers were allowed to come in and live and feed on the king. You know, that's the way we were. So we bend for the stranger, we provide for the stranger. There's no room for arrogance in that. In about 1790, one Hausa trader in the Akesa market in Oyoile went to the palace crying that some boys had stolen some goods from him. The Alaafin personally took it up, because that's serious. In Yoruba culture, the people you avoid touching, the people you avoid hurting are the foreigners, because they are the sons of the king. The Yoruba king is the father of the strangers in his kingdom. So you don't touch them, because then you'll be causing yourself a lot of trouble. And this Alaafin, when they reported at the palace, he took it over. He appointed some chiefs to go and investigate. 2-3 days later, they didn't come back to report to him. So he suspected that some big men might be hiding the boys who committed the crime. So he brought out his Shango something and called on Shango to go and strike not at the boys who committed the offense, but at the important people who are hiding them. That is how serious Yoruba people took the protection of strangers. A stranger can walk into a Yoruba compound and immediately begin to get food, love, support there. And if he walks out of that compound to go and do his business, and you go and ill-treat him, that compound will feel hot and they will be after you, because you have hurt a stranger in their compound. That's who we are. There is no room for arrogance in that type of culture.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other reason where there can't be room for arrogance is that Yoruba are embarked on their own version of development. And they were aware that whereas they have core values and core issues that will be Yoruba forever, they were not objecting to any addition from outside to enrich the core of their values. So you can't have additions if you didn't have strangers bringing them in. So their love for strangers was practical in the sense that it introduced new ideas to be examined and chewed. If bitter, spit it out. If useful, digest it.
Yeah.
That is the Yoruba way.
Thank you for your contributions. Once again, we run out of time. Before we go, I still want to repeat. Get a copy of A History of the Yoruba People. It's a good read, and it's a good legacy to leave for our children, our friends, family, and all the rest. So get a copy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.